Nobody move. We're gonna take turns punching each other. Me first. I get a mace. Ready, go. I love turn-based combat. I love the planning and the strategic complexity, thinking through all your options to come up with the right plan of attack. At its best, it's gameplay where every choice is meaningful, every fight important. Not all turn-based combat is at its best though, and it can have a hard time winning over new fans. At its worst, it can be a slow, meaningless slog towards a conclusion that you saw coming a mile away. So how do you make turn-based combat that accentuates the positives and eliminates as many negatives as possible? Today, let's talk about the pain points that lots of these games keep running into and how you can polish turn-based combat to be the best it can be. If you're looking to make the next great turn-based combat system, you're gonna have a lot of moving parts to keep track of. You're gonna need to stay organized with today's episode sponsor, Milanote. Milanote helps you organize and share your ideas, mood boards, storyboards, proposals, and notes. Milanote lets you keep it all in one place and share and collaborate on them all with your entire team. We even use it to organize thoughts for our episodes. It's got a clean and beautiful interface with intuitive drag and drop tools on a freeform canvas that keeps everyone informed and involved. Designers, developers, artists, managers, and everyone else that needs to know what's going on and has something to contribute. Milanote has built-in templates specifically for game design too, and guess what? It's free to sign up. Click the link in the description to sign up for free. Design Doc viewers will be entered in a giveaway to get a free Milanote Pro subscription. Milanote helps you take your thoughts from a dream to a plan. Link in the description, sign up now. Thanks Milanote. Turn-based combat is an ancient cornerstone of gaming, born from the tabletop scene and made famous with games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Phantasy Star, among lots of others. It's worked for decades, adaptable to all kinds of settings, systems, and aesthetics through the modern day, with games like Yakuza Like a Dragon, XCOM, and Octopath Traveler. Turn-based combat isn't everyone's cup of tea though. Outside of the diehard fans, you hear the same complaints over and over. It's slow, it's grindy, it's slow, it's not realistic. It's mostly people complaining about it being slow. And they're right, or at least they can be right. Turn-based combat can be slow, it can be abstract and grindy, but it doesn't have to be. Lots of these complaints are about fixable things that aren't an unchangeable core to the turn-based combat experience. The slow pace and grindy battles usually aren't the reason that fans fall in love with the format. Some are default design choices or are easiest to implement, but with some careful planning, a game designer can sand down the rough edges and still keep the parts of the turn-based combat that old fans love and make it easier to create new fans as well. So what can we do to fix some of those issues? The biggest and most common turn-based turnoff is just the amount of time spent waiting for something to happen. Waiting for a battle intro to play out, waiting for the enemy to make a move, waiting for your turn to move, waiting for attack animations, waiting for text. If you do it wrong, there are just a lot of moments of dead air that add up to make combat encounters last way longer than they need to. It's one of the bigger complaints about Pokemon. Pokemon battles across generations have felt very slow and stilted. Every action has little pauses between animations and multiple text boxes with redundant information. The 4th generation is especially bad. Every step of every battle has noticeable delays. You notice them on the transition into the fight, intro text, watching attack animations, status effects, text confirmations of everything that just happened. Every little thing happens one piece at a time and pauses at every step in between. Even HP drains at a snail's pace if you have enough of it. In Pokemon Sword and Shield, you can turn off battle animations and speed up text, but battle without animations deals a pretty severe blow to the game's charm. It doesn't really even solve the problem all the way either. A battle where you KO your opponent in a single attack still takes nearly half a minute to play out. This isn't the same as saying that long battles are inherently bad. They can be great, but there's a difference between something taking a long time and something feeling like it's taking a long time. The core of the problem involves there being lots of stretches of time where the player is waiting around for something to do. To help speed it up, think about which elements can happen together. Actions don't have to play out one at a time. ATB systems in Final Fantasy were a step forward partially because of how they spread out the waiting. Instead of entering all commands at once, then watching them all play out in a row, you could be entering commands while another command was happening. This sped up battles a bit without changing much of the underlying mechanics. Reducing the time each action takes is helpful, but you can also try to make the actions more interactive. Action commands help solve this problem by mixing in a minigame or a QTE that a player can perform to get a bonus. Super Mario RPG did this back in 1996, among others. You would get attack and defense boosts if you could time a button press in sync with the action on the screen. It made attack animations more active and worth paying attention to even after you had seen them dozens of times. But action commands are like salt. A little is nice, a lot, maybe not. Mario & Luigi Paper Jam has special attacks that are executed through lengthy action commands. They're like a Final Fantasy VII summon fused with a Mario Party minigame. Each attack is tied to one minigame, so you'll be doing that minigame over and over and over again. The attack commands aren't designed poorly or anything. If they were used sparingly, they'd be nice punctuation points. But they end up being used a little too frequently to be anything but grating after a while. The game's defensive action commands take a much lighter touch. Every enemy has a unique method of attacking you, with unique tells for who they're targeting. You have to learn and react to the tell to get through unscathed, and you even get to dish out a little extra damage if you time it just right. The defensive action commands are quick, interactive, and require a touch of thought, all of which help keep players on their toes. It's not a lot, but a lot of little improvements can add up to a much cleaner and more engaging battle system. What else can we do to speed things up? What if we think about this even more basically? What do you do the most when playing a turn-based game? Navigating menus. The core of turn-based combat centers around selecting options from a list over and over. When you're doing an action thousands of times, even tiny time savings will pay off big. Persona 5's menus are snappy to navigate. Each face button is a different command, removing a lot of the raw number of button presses per action. The time between thinking of your move and entering it in is kept to a minimum, and so are each menu move's visual cues. The UI is full of flourishes in animation and character movement as you navigate. They don't take up a lot of time, they're just there to accentuate your actions as you're performing them, and they go a long way towards making a uniquely satisfying menu system. Okay, now your combat is zippy and responsive. Good job. What's the next big complaint? Turn-based combat at its best relies on strategy and planning, so very simple fights usually aren't that fun. A default your turn, my turn structure might be too rigid and predictable. Time to start messing around with the turn economy. Lots of games let you change who gets to move, when they get to move, how moves can affect future moves, and how to limit your opponent's moves. More moves mean more damage dealt and less taken, or more time to prep or heal. It gives players another layer to think strategically about how they can turn the tide of battle. Sometimes it's really simple, like using buffs and debuffs to slow down, stop, or speed up character turns. Some games let you force opponents to skip their turn entirely. Shin Megami Tensei takes turn skipping to the extreme, where if you continuously attack with the right elements on the right opponent, you can double the number of turns you get and potentially sweep your enemies before they even get a chance to do anything. Careful though, play your cards wrong and they could do the same to you. Maybe casting spells to affect the turn economy is too subtle for you. What if you just grabbed the turn economy by the horns and lived with the consequences? Bravely Default lets you use the turns themselves like a resource. The game's main battle gimmick is the creatively titled Brave and Default system. You can default to defend yourself and save up turns to use them all at once. Or be brave and borrow up to 4 rounds of your future turns to try to get out of a battle faster. Make sure you're right though. If you can't get the job done and have gone into turn debt to do so, your opponent gets a bunch of moves in a row without you having a chance to respond. You can split who uses future turns, like saving them for your healer to try to hedge your bets. But the system is all about the risks you choose to take and knowing what your team is capable of before committing all your resources. Grandia does a great job at making a unique way to play around with how turns work. However, I haven't played Grandia. I have it, it's in my Steam library. Luckily, I have played Child of Light, and I hear it's basically Grandia, I think. Go play Child of Light. Also probably Grandia. Child of Light's battles revolve around this timeline. Each character and enemy travels along it to determine when they get to go. There's a wait phase, a command phase where time freezes and you can pick your move, and a cast phase where the character prepares the move you picked, then they do their thing when they get to the end of the line. Different moves will take different amounts of time to go through each of those phases. Slow, powerful moves might take longer to complete. Faster moves or even guarding will get you to the next turn sooner. However, a character getting hit also affects their position. Getting hit in the cast phase will send you back to the wait phase, wasting time. But again, you can do the same to your opponent. You're constantly looking at the timeline, adjusting your targets based on where everyone is on it and what everyone is about to do next. You can also use your little cursor companion in real time to slow down specific targets, giving you a large amount of control over how the battle plays out. The timeline system is an awesome iteration of ATB, adding a lot of depth to turn-based combat and keeps the players thinking throughout every fight. So we've gone over some of the nuts and bolts of how turn-based combat can feel better or worse depending on how a fight progresses and how you submit your actions, but turn-based combat might depend even more on how a game rewards you fight to fight. That could be experience, items, and equipment, sure, but that's not all the rewards can be. It could be novel fight types or tactics that make for compelling strategic encounters, or story progress, or unlocking new moves. All of that plays a complex role with what people usually call the grind. Most every game with turn-based combat has dozens or hundreds of encounters to go through, but not every game feels grindy. When people complain about the grind, they're often actually complaining about an imbalance in the reward you get for completing the fights the game puts you in. Things like filler battles that don't advance the story, fights that keep playing out in the same way and just take up time, long stretches between unlocking anything new. Action games tend to be a little more immune to the problem than turn-based games, because their fights are more about the action in the moment rather than deriving their fun more heavily from strategic planning. Different players will have different tolerance levels for this kind of thing, but eventually, too many fights that feel meaningless wind up being poisonous to the design of turn-based combat. A quick way out of the problem is to make sure players get a small but meaningful reward as often as possible. Final Fantasy V does it through its job system. Each fight completed gives out experience points that go towards leveling up your character, but it also gives out ability points to level up your character's job. Each character can swap out between more than a dozen different jobs and develop them independently with those ability points to get new abilities that are only learned through that job. The game makes job hopping easy and fun, which lets you get a variety of skills over multiple jobs to play with. The abilities can be mixed and matched with those of other party members to create crazy combinations that are super fun to experiment with. Each job levels up at different rates, which makes it so new abilities unlock at small random intervals all the time. You won't go through too many fights before a new move or skill opens up for someone. The game lets you set short-term goals for each character and longer-term ones for the party composition that you're constantly progressing towards. You also see this in tactics games, where many characters leveling up on independent schedules lets you strategize around the composition of each character in short bursts after each fight. Small, frequent upgrades are a great way to get a sense of concrete progress that keeps the feeling of the grind at bay. Leveling up is cool, but that's not the only tool in the toolbox if you're trying to hide the grind. Treating encounters like a sort of scavenger hunt is another option. Pokemon's Pokédex is the most straightforward example of a scavenger hunt built into the game's encounter system, but other games use it differently. Shin Megami Tensei lets you add to your team of demons only by finding them in the world and starting negotiations. They're not risk-free either. They might demand items or ask questions about your opinions to see if they gel with you. If negotiations go poorly, you might lose a turn, which can be super dangerous in a combat system as swingy as this one. The strategy behind finding new demons and adding them to your team throws an interesting wrinkle into each encounter, instead of the one and only goal being a race to 0 HP. That's a pretty specialized fix though. Even if recruiting your enemies doesn't make sense for a game, just seeing new types of enemies can be its own reward. Dragon Quest XI has a super charming set of them where every baddie stands out with delightful character designs and goofy pun names. Of course you have the classic slimes. They're good, but a little played out. Check out Sham Hatwitch, or the Cruel Cumber. The game keeps the new designs coming consistently, and makes getting to a new area with new enemies to fight its own little reward. Another option is to weave the battle system into the game's narrative. The support system in modern Fire Emblem games creates a great secondary goal during the game's normal encounters. As pairs of characters fight side by side or support each other, each pair's support level rises. They gain extra bonuses as they unlock new support levels to help them be more effective. More importantly, there are huge chunks of the story locked behind conversations that only happen at certain support levels. Much of the characterization relies on getting these support conversations. and even special side missions might only become available through them. In Fire Emblem Awakening, an entire set of new party members depends on who you decide to pair up with whom. The support system adds another layer of meaning to the standard battles, impacts your tactical positioning, and gives plenty of reason to look at your characters as more than just their stat lines. You could attack the grind more directly though. There are paths you can go down that cancel the need for grinding altogether. In Final Fantasy VIII, as you level up your characters, the game levels up enemies alongside you. There's no way to out-level your opponent. If you're having trouble, you probably just need to get more acquainted with the junction system, rather than trying to brute force your way through. Chrono Cross puts a cap on your stat increases after each boss fight, ensuring you can't stray too far from where the game expects you to be on the power curve at any given time. But there are people who do like grinding, treating it almost like a meditative exercise or something to do in the background. If you're careful, you can totally thread the needle and give both pro and anti-grind players what they want. Just make the grind optional. Disgaea uses a system called the Item World. Each weapon in Disgaea has a full-on dungeon inside it, with rare items having more floors in its dungeon. The rewards for playing in the Item World are worth it too. Clearing dungeon floors boosts the weapon's stats and makes them significantly more powerful. If you're the type of player who loves the grind, there's an incredible amount of it to do. If you're not, you can still easily beat the game without interacting with the system much at all. Disgaea separates the grind from the story, and it works well enough to get both types of turn-based combat fans what they want without ruining the fun of the other side. Head down to the comments and join the discussion about turn-based RPG combat. We'll be talking about some unique battle systems that streamline the gameplay, speed up menus, and use all kinds of unique rewards to make the whole thing more fun. Turn-based RPG combat isn't for everyone, but it's not a relic of the past. Give the battle system the care and attention it deserves, and all your moves will pay off.